I love the lighting of the Advent wreath. I love the history behind it and the tradition. I love the ritual. I love the flames. And this is something that we used to do when I was a kid at a church I worshiped at when I was very young. And so it reminds me of those simpler, easier times. But sometimes I wonder why during this beautiful season, why we focus so much on things from our past rather than on our future. I get frustrated sometimes by the nostalgia at Christmas. I mean, this is a time of waiting, of hoping for a future that we cannot yet imagine. So why do we spend so much of our time thinking about what has passed us by? I think it can have an escapist function. Nostalgia at Christmas can keep us from paying attention to what's going on around us and can also paper over the very real issues with those times. Has anyone tried to watch Holiday Inn recently? I tried to watch it a few years ago with my kids and I was horrified. Sometimes we misremember the difficult parts of our past when we look at this time with so much nostalgia. But I do love old Christmas movies. And I love old Christmas music. And for many, Christmas is a time that is absolutely steeped and drowning in nostalgia. We listen to old music. We watch old movies. We see old friends, remember old times. And sometimes even the Christmas movies themselves are about that feeling of nostalgia. The Christmas movies are about remembering that time when things were easier. Things were simpler for us. We were talking this last week in the office about a movie where an adult is renewed in their belief in Santa Claus by being reminded of a time when they were either excited or disappointed about a toy or gift they did or did not get. What was that movie we were talking about? Pastor Chris, do you remember the movie I was talking about?
Are you talking about Miracle on 34th Street?
No.
The remake of Miracle on 34th Street?
No.
Elf?
No, that's not it.
Dashing Through the Snow?
No.
The Santa Claus?
No.
Santa Claus 2?
No.
The Santa Claus 3?
Not it.
The Santa Trap?
No.
Polar Express?
No.
Ernest Saves Christmas?
That's it. That's it. Right, there are all of these movies that this is the entire plot, or at least a main subplot of the movie, of remembering this time when things are simpler, when things were easier, to look back like a child. So is that only bad to have nostalgia at Christmas, or is there a reason and a purpose? I think it can help us be in a very different kind of headspace around Christmas. It can help us to live in a very different imaginative world for this season. Can help us remember a time when magic and wonder and joy were a significant part of who we were. G.K. Chesterton says that fairy tales say that apples were golden only to refresh the forgotten moment when we first found that they were green. They make rivers run with wine only to make us remember for one wild moment that they run with water. It reminds us of a time when we believed in a generosity of spirit, when we believed in love, when we believed in care for all and especially the most vulnerable among us. How many times in Christmas movies is "It's Christmas" used as a justification for somebody to be loving or kind? Things that we as Christians should be striving to be always. And sometimes it's difficult to hold these two things in tension, right? It is difficult to remember the good parts of the past, but to be moving into a future we cannot yet imagine. This whole sermon series is based on a phrase from Psalm 126, and we're going to read this whole psalm now that I think does a masterful job of holding these two ideas in tension. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negev. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. May God bless the reading and hearing of just a portion of God's word. This psalm was written in a place and a time when things were difficult for the psalmist, difficult for the writer, difficult for their entire community. They are remembering in this moment a time when things were not like this, saying, yes, things are difficult now, things are painful now, things are complicated now, but things were not always like this. And there are two primary images, two primary metaphors that the psalmist uses to talk about either the time when things were good or the way that times might be better. And the first metaphor is sowing and reaping, planting seeds that are going to grow up into something absolutely unimaginable, into a harvest that cannot be imagined right now. And the second image is a watercourse in the Negev, or what they call a wadi. This is a dry riverbed that every year completely dries out. And then when the rains come, which they inevitably do, they may not for a season, they may not for a couple of years, but the rains always come. The rains water the wadi, and it becomes, again, a place where things grow and a place where life flourishes, like water courses in the Negev will be the restored fortunes of those who have sown in tears and reaped with joy. And so there are two parts of this psalm. At the beginning, the writer, the psalmist, is talking about the remembering. They are looking back and thinking about the things that God did in the past, and they're talking about how we felt and how we responded to the things that God did long ago. And they spend some time reveling in that. They spend some time in nostalgia for when things were simpler, for when things were easier. They spend some time in remembering, but they don't stay there. Then they move on to sowing. And in order to sow, you have to first recognize how things are. This is not a way of saying, yes, let's look back at when times were perfect and we know that times are going to be perfect again. It's not looking at our present moment and saying everything's fine. Let's just not worry about it. This is an honest view of life as it is, and looking at a future, hoping for a future, and then working to make that better future happen. Now, this happens often underground. It happens in hiddenness. That is unfortunately how seeds grow. I've heard, I can't get them to do it, but this is what people tell me, is that when you plant seeds, things come up out of the ground at the right time, with work and with patience, and almost always after we think it should be, there will be a harvest. So the two parts of the psalm are the remembering and the sowing. So how do we remember now? Nostalgia is not necessarily bad as long as we are honest about what we are being nostalgic for. But it can be energizing. It can be energizing to look at the good things that God has done in us and through us and around us, and to remember those who have gone before us and the life that they have brought us. And it can help us to remember why we are doing all of this in the first place, but we must not get stuck there. The purpose of remembering the past can never be to go back to the past. Not that we could, even if we wanted to, so it doesn't matter, but we have to make the move from remembering to sowing, or as I like to think of it, plotting joy. Recognizing that it is not our job to be good descendants, but to be good ancestors. We honor those who have gone before us by making a way for those who will come after us. There's a musical that came out a few years ago called In the Heights. It's the other Lin-Manuel Miranda musical. And in it, a father and daughter are arguing about her plans for the future. See, he never finished high school, and he worked and he scrimped and he saved and he hustled and he saved to give his daughter the chance to get a college degree and a better chance to succeed than he had. But she doesn't want to do it the way that he thought she should, which was at an elite university far from home. So when she comes back home and tells him her plans to stay in the neighborhood instead of getting out like he wanted her to do, he says, "This is it, isn't it? This is the moment you do better than me. Not because of some fancy degree, but because you can see a future that I can't." We remember in order to see a better future, and then in order to sow and to plot joy. Sowing and plotting joy often has to be a deliberate choice. It's not something we always feel like doing, but something intentional. And this is what I mean by plotting. It's a little bit of a different image than sowing. In plotting, we work deliberately. We work quietly. We work behind the scenes. We work like George Clooney in Ocean's 11 or Frank Sinatra, depending on which version you're looking at. This is something that takes work. It's something that takes creativity. It's something that takes determination. As C.S. Lewis says, joy is the serious business of the kingdom of heaven. We can't just wait for joy to happen around us. We need to plot for it. So that can start with any small way of bringing joy to the people around you. It can mean having children hand out bubbles for all of the adults to be blowing around us. It can mean any small way of bringing joy to the people around you. Excuse me just a moment. This is Kyler. This is a small way of bringing joy to the people around me. It can be any talent or skill. It can be baking or humor. It can be nature or love. It can be a personal note or a hug on a bad day. It can be pictures of your dog or a room full of people blowing bubbles. Just a moment. Thanks, Joe. He would have a tiny doggy aneurysm if he got loose and saw all of you. So how can we be part of plotting joy? See, when I was just a small child in rural Missouri,
Hi, my name's Buddy the Elf, and I just came here from the North Pole. I passed through the 7 levels of the candy cane forest, through the sea of the swirly, twirly gumdrops, and then I walked through these doors into St. Andrews. Welcome to our all-church Christmas party.
All right, well, I can't compete with that. How can we be a part of plotting joy? We've had a sermon and we've given the announcements. We have worshiped and we have prayed. And so the only thing left is a blessing. So Saints of Andrew and all saints everywhere, go to love and serve your God by plotting joy. There it is.